Hello, investors. Welcome to another edition of 18 Minutes with 180 Markets. Friends, we know this can be an extremely frustrating time right now. About 2/3 of our country is locked down. But as the saying goes, life goes on. And going on, one of those big themes out there that is taking place now, and frankly, COVID's only accelerated it, is artificial intelligence, data science, and the path forward to lowering costs and being more optimal. And with us today, we have Elizabeth Whitelock, CEO and Managing Director of HoustonWeHave, and their company is completely focused on solving these problems within the data science field. We're going to get into the details a little bit more. Elizabeth's going to talk about her 3 business segments, how they fit in to the AI world, what it exactly means, and how they are helping make the world a better place into the end of the decade. With that introduction, Elizabeth, welcome to 18 Minutes with 180 Markets.
Thank you so much, Greg, for having me.
Hey, Elizabeth, everybody's got a story. And I think in your case, particularly, it's really important in the data science world. Can you just tell us a couple minutes about yourself?
Sure. So I started my career in IT, having decided that having studied law, I thought I don't really want to be a lawyer, and looked at IT and realized there was this massive opportunity to kind of make a difference. And that's something that's always been very important to me. And I found myself working in the data world with a database company. And from there, I feel I've kind of remained in that space in some way, shape, or form. So I started off with a sort of technical hat on and was a programmer and analyst. I moved into training and consulting, eventually into management. And the companies that I've worked for have been data related in some way. So whether that's analytics or business intelligence, or actually getting the data out of places and making sense of it, and then into the world of data science. And here we are today with AI all around us, A for artificial in the mainstream. Our view of that space is augmenting the intelligence of the humans and taking a very human-centric view, but very much about data from technical through sales into management, and starting this company about 10 years ago.
Excellent. So many ways I can go there, Elizabeth. Data science, maybe I'll start here. Data science, an incredibly broad field. But let's take it down into HoustonWeHave, your business, your company. Can you just break down for the audience, where does HoustonWeHave focus within the data science and AI world?
Sure. So it really started with our patented product, Intel Fuse, as we call it. And that is a piece of software that was originally designed for the Australian Defence Intelligence Organisation. Why was that the case? Because in the world of defense intelligence, while there is data available, they don't necessarily have a vast quantity of it. But what they do have is what they can hear, what they can see. They might ask people who are experts in a particular field, what is your opinion on X, Y, or Z? And so when you're lacking data, how do I take what I have and blend that with this human piece, so that we can then create this forecast or this prediction of a future event? So Intel Fuse is intrinsic as a platform across our business as a whole. It is still used by Defence today. The Australian Signals Department is the largest user of our software, going out to each of the 3 services. But that software underpins other pieces of our business, including Prometheus, which is about the health fund industry. So there are about 34, 35 private health insurance companies in Australia today, and we have about half of those as our clients. And what we do for them is it's all about the data. So it's about making sense of the data that they have. So whether that's about Greg as a member of the fund, whether that is the policy that you have or the claims that you've made or the providers that have provided that, we make sense of that so that the health funds can run their business from a compliance perspective, profitability perspective, and so on. And Intel Fuse is being used in that space as well to help them predict, is Greg going to leave? is Greg going to leave the fund? And if he is going to leave the fund, is he a client that we should be retaining? And how do we retain that? So we're bringing this patented piece into this other space as well. Then the third piece of our business is a recent acquisition, which is EchoIQ. Now that our focus there is very much about transforming the diagnosis of cardiac conditions. And we're using underpinning data science. In that space, we're using some machine learning neural network type scenarios, which probably don't mean anything to anyone, but it's a series of different algorithms. But the blending of what we have today with IntelFuse, that will come back into an echo scenario to help us deal with situations that have missing information and to create more certainty around the diagnosis of that aortic condition. So 3 separate pieces, but in fact, IntelFuse sits underneath them all to support the focus and the decisions and predictions that each of those business units do.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. And a quick question, just based on what you said, and I guess starting out with the Defense Force, within data science, and I'm just curious myself, a lot of times, and especially on Wall Street, there is so much data. It's almost like there's too much, and how do you make sense of it? And also what I would call false signals, which is, as an example, how many cars are in a parking lot to measure same-store sales. But you said with the Defense Force, their issue is that there's not necessarily that much information. So then my question to you is it the interpretation of data that's the true art of the science, if you will?
So the interpretation of the data through the lens of the problem that you're dealing with. So we can look at the same data. And whether that's about, for example, identifying the customers who are most likely to leave us. My view of that might be that we should save everybody. So I want to interpret the data and I want to save every client that we have. Whereas your perspective might be, no, I actually only want to save or put a lot of focus on this demographic. So there is an interpretation piece that goes with that. And so for us, rather than actually dealing with the data or the quantity or the quality of the data, we prefer to start with the human-centric view of the problem, because we all have a different lens that we apply to that data. And so it's important to start with, what is it that we're trying to solve?
Sure.
And what are the pieces that make up that problem? Because in understanding that, the data lake that I've got back here with all of this data about everything that I've ever gathered over the last 20 years might be completely irrelevant. And in fact, we have worked with clients who have called us up and said, I've got all of this data and I still can't get an answer. And when we come in, and when we come in and we sit down and we work with their stakeholders, guess what they have? They might have at best half of the data that they need in order to answer the question. So when you're mining data and the nuggets that you need to answer the question don't exist, then how are you going to get to the answer? So we start by understanding it. And out of that, where do we need to focus? What information do we exactly need to help us get to that answer? And so interpretation is a very important aspect of that. But what also comes into being is, what flavor of AI might you need? What flavor of data science do you need? There are so many varieties. It's like walking into a gelato shop. That's my way of putting it. You walk into the gelato shop and you see all these colors and flavors, and you can't decide what to eat, right? And AI is a bit like that in some respects. It's like, you've got all of these different algorithms and all of these different approaches, but what is it that's really useful and going to help you solve your problem? And it may be a variety of some of those things, or it may be, in fact, you just simply don't have enough data to do any data science whatsoever. So what can we interpret out of other forms of analysis to get some insight? But the beauty of IntelFuse is it doesn't matter how much data you've got.
I see. Yeah. And then I guess also my next question then is, it's very helpful. With IntelFuse, you are focused on 3 market segments, and I can tell that that's quite deliberate. And is that because in this interpretation world, if you will, it's not a question of, oh, my product can apply to anything and everything. You have to go to a certain segment of the market and say, we have to focus on healthcare or defense or whatever the problem is, as you said, you want to solve?
That's right. And the thing is that if you've got a piece of software or you've got an application that can solve many problems, the reality is you need to start somewhere. You need to start with something that you can grasp and build some credibility in. Because once you've got credibility in one sector, then maybe you can go on to another, but you've got to get a foothold somewhere and then build from there. And of course, Intel Fuse can be applied to many different problems. But with Prometheus and the health space, Echo in the health space, both using lots of data, both using data science in some way, shape, or form, and Intel Fuse being this kind of extra enabler on top of what they currently do to get even greater insight. And not only just the insight, but saying, what is likely to happen, Greg, tomorrow? But not only are we going to say what's going to happen tomorrow, we can say, here's why it's going to happen. So for industries like insurance and defense, and particularly in medical regulatory environments, you're going to have to be able to show, how did you get to that place? So transparency is really, really important. And that's another feature of what Intel Fuse provides. It's highly explainable. So when you look at that, you can say, I'm going to make this decision. And the reason I'm making this decision is because it's being influenced in this direction by these three factors. You know why.
It's almost like in investing factor modeling, if you will, is it based on your industry, your sector? In other words, there's a famous saying that you can explain about 80% of a stock's performance move by facts other than the company itself.
There you go.
And then, I don't want to talk too much about within the business itself. You've concentrated on these segments, but is your distribution model, do you have salespeople? How do you get, obviously you come from the defense area, so I assume that you have some logical extensions into that place. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
So our model is direct sales. So we have salespeople who focus on health funds, as an example. We have someone who comes from a federal government perspective, and his contacts are across that space. And then for me, I've been managing the defense account directly and bringing in some other individuals who have clearance and who can help support that process. But on top of that, we do have a business partnership arrangement with a number of organizations. So at one end of the town, we've got people like Accenture, for example, and Wipro. And then at the other end of that spectrum, we have organizations who are very defense focused. People who have come from a defense background, who see our software and recognize ways to take that back into defense and bundle it as, say, another application or a series of services. So business partnerships are quite key to extending our footprint within a particular industry, but also from a perspective of identifying problems that we might exist in a completely new vertical, for example. But having that speciality and that expertise in that industry means we can bring our expertise of software and blend the two to create solutions to problems that have been identified.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of, I guess, a different vertical, your recent acquisition, within EchoIQ, can you just talk about that particular, what drew you to that area? Obviously, everyone knows that cardiovascular is a big area, but just, what was the trigger point for you?
So the application of AI as something that does good, that's really, really important to us. And if you were to ever sit through any of our presentations, the last slide that comes up is it's change for good. And there is a lot of stigma around AI, as perhaps we all are aware. People are very fearful of it. They're very sure that it's going to take away their jobs. And so when we look at AI, we want to make a difference, essentially, and that difference is actually a positive difference for the humans who are part of that process. the EchoIQ opportunity was brought to us. And of course, it fits completely and nicely into that sweet spot of AI. But secondly, it allowed us to take what we were kind of gleaning and learning through the health insurance space and move into health, if you like, med tech space.
Right.
And health, if we've seen nothing out of COVID in the last couple of years, is health is now something that is getting a lot of focus. And reality is that we are seeing in this particular area of cardiac, we're seeing lots of individuals who are going undiagnosed. And the algorithm that was built by Alert Echo IQ was designed to help identify that series of conditions earlier. So while we're working on one condition at the moment, the reality is that by getting that algorithm right to identify aortic stenosis, we can then retrain it to also look for other conditions, pulmonary hypertension, mitral valve stenosis, and so on. And so this is a massive opportunity for not only the individuals who are going to benefit from that diagnosis, but it's a massive opportunity for HoustonWeHave to make a mark and take a stance in a very growing sector of health, and specifically med tech.
Yeah, no, I can see now how it perfectly fits in with, as you said, your mission statement and also your existing skill set to really take advantage. Hey, Elizabeth, we try to keep these interviews short, unfortunately. Do you have any closing remarks for the audience?
HoustonWeHave we chose the name HoustonWeHave in order to stand out from the crowd because as everybody knows, that what was the phrase, was it Apollo 13, I think it was specifically, Houston, we have a problem. And it kind of conjures up that moment in time where all of a sudden everything is hanging in the balance. And with all the data in the world, if you think back to that scene in that movie with Tom Hanks, of all of the data that they had, they were stuck in a position. And so where we're kind of coming from is how do we help organizations get to a place where they are better equipped to make those decisions, that they have the confidence to make those decisions, even when they might be drowning in data. The reality is that sometimes in that moment, what you have is what's in front of you. And so how do you make the decision and the best decision for you, for your organization, with what's available? Data, your opinion, your instinct. And that's where what we're bringing together. Yep,
Elizabeth, and that coincides perfectly with that expression in wellness today of stay present.
Absolutely.
And Elizabeth, thank you so much. We look forward to chatting with you in the future, to seeing where you're going months from now, years from now, and so forth and so on.
Thank you.
This has been great, Elizabeth. Thank you so much.
Pleasure, Greg. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye-bye.